Welcome to Soul Elevation, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin. And if you're watching the live stream here, I'm hoping that this is going to work. I have not done an actual live directly on YouTube for quite some time because it kept clonking out on me. And so what I have been doing is that I've been going on Zoom and then streaming it through Zoom, but it doesn't allow me to see comments as easily. But because I kept having that experience where I was going directly on YouTube and then it was crashing, I got very shy about trying to do that because it's hard to get like 2 minutes into something and then realize you lost the connection. So subsequently, I am recording this on Zoom. So if I do lose connection, I'm going to keep going and then I'll post that into YouTube. So just give me a little bit of time and you can see what you missed if we lose this connection. But for those who are joining on the video, on the live, or if you're listening later in the recording, even on the audio recording, thank you so much for being here. And today I want to talk about something that has been really coming into focus for me recently for a few different reasons that I'll go into, but it is about whether evil actually exists. So, excuse me, I'm kind of getting over some sort of little tickle in my throat here. Um, so when I grew up in kind of a traditional religious background, but we weren't overly religious. But the only sort of, as a child, like many people, the only real exposure that I had to spirituality was through organized religion, and it was a Christian religion. And evil is a common thing that's talked about in Christianity, I think many religions. And when I became a young adult, I started to reject that that the dogma of religion. And so I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. I didn't necessarily become I don't think I'd ever would have called myself an atheist, but I think there were definitely periods in my life where I would consider myself an agnostic. I just didn't know. And and then when I kind of regained my spiritual footing, it started in a meditation through meditation, which had a yogic tradition, more of a Hindu feel to it. I've also kind of dabbled in Buddhism. And so I've had kind of a lot of different tastes of different religions. And where I sit now is really more of a personal experience. Like many, I see this reflected a lot with a lot of people's journeys where they are no longer really looking to religion to define their beliefs. They're not trying to stay within the box of any certain dogma or tradition, but they are, or at least I am, kind of it's a more direct, more personal experience. And I do draw on a lot of things that I read. I like to listen to people, and sometimes I do find religious texts that speak to me. There are a lot of biblical verses that you'll hear me quote because they feel very very pertinent, very relevant, very powerful. You probably have heard me talk about the power of Psalm 23, for example. So anyway, all of that to say that when I was younger, I had no doubt that evil existed because it was very plain to me my in the little religious teaching that I got. Because I'll also mention, if I forgot to say this before, we didn't really go to church a ton growing up. So it wasn't like I grew up in a really strong Christian tradition. But that was my exposure. But as I kind of started to explore different paths and listen to different people's perspectives, I started to believe that evil didn't exist, that it was a control mechanism, and that, different things. But basically, my my belief at that time was that evil wasn't real. And that goes along with a little bit of the overly love and light. I definitely went very far into the love and light, which looking back now, I can see that there is some spiritual bypassing that happens with that. There is truth to it. Ultimately, we all are source, but when we refuse to accept that there is anything beyond love and light, then we're not really seeing a clear picture of what's going on. So I have recently been reading a book by a man named Paul Levy called Wetiko. And in fact, I'll put the link in the show notes when I'm finished recording because he's got a couple of books on Wetiko. And I think this is the second book. But Wetiko is, I think it's a Native American term, and it's essentially a mind virus. And we can also think of it as evil. This book talks a lot about evil. And there have been some things that have really caught my attention with this book that I want to share, and I would highly recommend that you read this book too. Um, but one of them is that evil is a mind virus and it's contagious, but it also is like this living energy. And um, so I I thought that was really interesting that this is this mind virus and that we're catching it from other people and we're passing it along. And you can think about this in terms of just what you pick up from the media, what you pick up from conversation, what starts to become important to you based on how society is acting, based on what you're hearing in the media, in the news. And a lot of that is fear based. And fear is such a really, really strong control mechanism. It's a very powerful energy, but it's a very powerful energy for manipulation. So it's a way, and there is intelligence behind the use of fear a lot of times because we get into fear and we think something else is going to save us. We give our power to what we think is going to save us. We hand our control over. And we see this, we have seen this in the masses through what we've just gone through in the last 5 years with the pandemic. We see this with war. We see this with just our own insecurities and the the way that we behave in society, and the way that we pass these things on to each other. And so that was really interesting, this whole mind virus part of it. And but another piece to it is something that I believe he said came from the Bible. I wasn't familiar with this verse, or this part of it, but it was that somebody asked Satan who he is. And the response, I'm going to butcher it here, but the response was something like, I am what people think the lowest of the low is, and yet through me can become the direct contact to source. Again, this is totally Kara's filter here of what I heard and what I'm trying to convey, but that was the essence of it. And it is, if we can recognize fear and evil and the Wetiko virus, this mind virus, if we can recognize it for what it is, and we can not fall into fear, not fall into the darkness, through it is salvation. And in that way, that's a very interesting way to think about the role of evil. I was talking about this with a friend of mine a couple of days ago because there is also a divine creator. There is a God. And if that is an ultimate creator, then it stands to reason that God created everything, including evil. And that is something, that's a paradox, right? Why would an all-loving God who is on our side, wants the best for us, why would God create evil that comes through as suffering, that causes so much suffering on this planet and through our human experience? And so, a couple of points about that. One is that evil is the inversion of life. And in fact, evil is live spelled backwards. That kind of blew my mind if you've never thought about that. But if you think about evil being this inversion, and that is something that is a powerful tool that is used a lot in negative manipulations, in negative agendas, is that they take parts of truth and they invert it and they package that. I mean, that's what narcissism is. Narcissism is people taking things that are partially true and blowing up parts of it that suit their agenda but aren't the core of the truth. It's not the real truth. There might be parts of it that are true, but then they take that and they run with it and they put a spotlight on a magnifying glass on it and make that what we're all focusing on when that's not really the issue at hand. And so evil, a very powerful tool of evil is to invert the truth. And then you see that even in the English language, live, live, life, evil, it is the inversion of life. And so if we go back to God created everything, and so did he create evil? Does that mean that evil entities are working on behalf of God? I would say no. They are There's that separation. They have separated themselves from source. Now, ultimately, if you zoom way, 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 way out, it's all part of a master plan. It's all part of God, yes. And so if you zoom way out, everything is a tool of God. But we have these entities, these energies, these beings that have separated themselves from God. They are not they're not connected to that divine source anymore. And so what happens? They cannot generate their own energy. They become parasites. And this circles us back to the um, the fear. They have to create this energy. Fear is it generates so much energy, and it then feeds them. And they're like parasites because they're not connected to source. They don't have that source connection that is generating that energy for them. So they rely on kicking up this energy within others and then feeding off of that. And so you may have beings in your life, you may have contacts in your life, and you can see how this is true. They seek out drama. They know how to push buttons. You know that if you're going to interact with them, that you're going to be triggered, and they're going to deliberately do that. They may not consciously do it, but chaos is following them wherever they go. They're stirring up drama. Somebody's always mad at them. They're always mad at somebody else. And so that is, I'm sure that you have felt that. And We have that happening at the bigger scale, behind the scenes of the strings that are pulling humanity around, where they're kicking up drama, they're feeding us fear, they're creating scenarios that are where there is huge amounts of suffering. And then we are all in fear. We are feeding off of each other, but they ultimately are parasitically siphoning that from humanity. But remember that in the grand design, if we can move through it and we don't lose ourselves, we can find our salvation through it. And we know this too from our own experiences in life. And that, yeah, I see this. The truth is coming for everyone. Thank God. Yes, thank you. Um, but we see this in our own life when we may be going through a dark night of the soul. We may be having challenges that we have never faced before, that we don't know if we're going to have the courage and the strength to face. And we do it. We move through it and we become stronger. We become wiser. We become more compassionate through that suffering. We see another's suffering in a different way because of what we've been through. So, through those experiences, we then are able to become a higher version of ourselves. So, ultimately, it is all part of source. Ultimately, it's part of a divine plan, but the ball is in all the excuse me, the ball is in our court in terms of how we deal with the fear that's being fed with us, how we deal with the drama that comes into our lives, what we focus on, how we respond, how we move through it. And the opportunity is that if we can keep seeking the truth, if we can keep going towards God and finding our solutions through God, then we will find our own liberation. So that was everything that I wanted to share. Again, I'll put the link to this book in the show notes. It's not exactly what we talked about today, but a lot of the topics that we have talked about today have been inspired by that book. And I've just gotten so many like, whoa, that just blew me away. So I thank you so much for being here with me today. And I wish you every blessing. And I'll see you next time.